Thailand plans to reopen lacks clarity with rising doubts for anything like mass tourism in 2021. As reduced quarantine comes into effect on the 1st of April with a promise of a full reopening by the 1st of October, the situation looks increasingly complex even to those involved in the foreign tourism industry, so it must be bewildering for foreign tourists planning their first getaway somewhere in the world after the pandemic has finally receded. That somewhere, unfortunately, may not be Thailand if it involves red tape and a controlled vacation similar to a relaxed form of quarantine. People want to put the pandemic and the new normal behind them forever, and the only way that can be done is with wholesale vaccination of the population in all countries. In the meantime, the use of electronic vaccine passports may be required on a resurgent international flight network to restart global mass market tourism again. Senior tourism industry figures have begun to voice anxiety about current plans to reopen the kingdom's borders to mass foreign tourism. It comes as last week's announcement of a return to normality by the 1st of October has already descended into confusion with buzzword schemes, lack of clarity, and what still amounts to controlled entry and overseen vacations being proposed for the kingdom. There must now be doubt about the kingdom's foreign tourism projections for 2021 unless there is a decisive change in emphasis. Senior industry leaders such as the chief executive of Centura Hotels and Resorts, Thirupong Chuaichu, Inset Bottom, have expressed concern at the lack of a clear plan to attract back foreign tourists to the kingdom. It comes a week after the Centre for COVID-19 Situation Administration, CCSA, announced that the country would reopen fully by the 1st of October, but then added that this would be under bubble and seal conditions as the Prime Minister, Prayut Chan-o-cha, signalled a more decisive approach after being inoculated with the AstraZeneca jab along with members of his cabinet, Inset, last week. The Minister of Public Health, Anitin Charnvirakul, on Monday, promised just over 150,000 doses out of 1 million vaccine units on hand to be used in Koh Samui and Phuket as part of efforts to reopen these key tourism areas. Thailand is engaged in a race against time and competing countries in the global market to relaunch its foreign tourism industry this year. The kingdom's Centre for COVID-19 Situation Administration, CCSA, last week announced that the country would be open to tourists without quarantine from the 1st of October next, but, at the same time, added that this would be under bubble and seal conditions. Centre for COVID-19 announces bubble and seal measures after the 1st of October. This week, amid growing dissatisfaction among the country's larger tourist business operators as to how the kingdom is approaching reopening to the foreign tourism market, there was some indication as to how it might work as the Department of Disease Control on Koh Samui revealed that it had been approved in principle under what appears to be a bubble and seal controlled environment to welcome back foreign tourists from the 1st of July, with reports of a Bangkok Airways flight from Singapore flying into the island. Remarkably akin to last year's special tourist visa fiasco and a flight that arrived from China, this situation is remarkably akin to last year's Big Idea, which saw the government's much-vaunted special tourist visa disappoint in the months after it was launched, when a flight of foreign tourists arriving from Shanghai was hailed as a breakthrough in October 2020. Special tourist visa, first Chinese tourists fly in. It was not. The months that came after saw record low levels of foreign tourists returning to Thailand, with less than 0.2% of normal arrivals for December 2020 and January 2021, formerly the peak season of the foreign tourism industry. Amid buzzwords and jargon with no clarity, the target of 5 million foreign tourists is being lost sight of. Given the nature of what is being outlined, there must be fears that the 5 million foreign tourists still projected by the Finance Ministry for 2021 is at least under threat. The visitor numbers for the third quarter commencing in July will tell us more, but more importantly, by then, will be the progress of the kingdom's vaccination program. The use of buzzwords and buzz phrases such as sandbox and bubble and seal simply adds to the confusion and frustration of potential tourists who seek nothing less or more than to return to Thailand with just a plane ticket, a passport in their hand and money in their pockets. Until this happens, mass tourism will not return. Successful government change of heart last year that saw foreigners living in Thailand or working in the kingdom allowed to return under a controlled regime last year. The Thai government, after months of lobbying, was finally convinced to allow resident expats and those with connections to enter the kingdom under the then newly developed alternative quarantine scheme and a clearance system operated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The scheme was a success and has allowed tens of thousands of foreigners to return to Thailand at great expense to themselves and of benefits to the Thai economy. At that time, The Thai government and some officials appeared to fail, up to that point, to see the difference between expats living in Thailand or with connections to the kingdom and foreign tourists. Now the same mistake is being made in reverse. Foreign tourists just want 2 to 3 weeks of relaxation in the sun, but it must be with freedom. Most foreign tourists to Thailand simply seek 2 to 3 weeks of freedom where they can enjoy the sunshine and the laid-back lifestyle that makes Thailand so popular across the world with tens of millions of regular visitors. Despite the hype and the hoopla, they are not looking for wellness or any other fanciful termed holidays. They are simply looking for sunshine and freedom away from their lives back at home, especially given the experience nearly all have been through in the last 12 months. The current proposals of the Thai government are unlikely to generate the levels of mass foreign tourism seen in the past, in which Thailand's economy so badly needs, unless the country is opened in conditions much the same as existed before March 2020. Mass tourism levels of visitors will not return until the current regime is completely dismantled. This means dismantling the quarantine system, the red tape and onerous requirements demanded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with a return to visa on arrival for qualifying countries with near-normal flight schedules operating into the kingdom. Of course, this cannot happen until the kingdom's population is vaccinated, with Thai experts such as Dr. Yong Puvaran recommending that at least 70% of the population get the jab. Dr. Yong has urged the government to focus on obtaining 100 million doses by using any means at its disposal. So far, the Thai government has said that it is aiming to procure up to 70 million doses this year, with less than 100,000 people, mostly in Samut Sakhon province, having received any vaccine doses as of now. Vaccination campaigns in countries of origin and the return of full flight connectivity will also decide this. It is also dependent on countries of origin such as the United States, Europe, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand and other Asian countries completing their vaccination programs. It also must coincide with the return of the international flight system with critical levels of connectivity and the use of a simple vaccination passport system such as that developed by the International Air Transport Association, IATA, currently being trialed on major airlines such as Qatar Airways. Minor Group boss criticizes the government on several fronts, from the rejection of the COVAX program to momentum on vaccination. This week, the government faced overt criticism from major industry leaders including William Hynek of the Minor Group, one of Thailand's most successful firms and an operator of a chain of hotels in the country. He, like other tourism business leaders, has encouraged the government to embrace the world vaccine passport system using smartphones, being trialed right now by the international airline industry as an early screening system until the population is fully vaccinated. The system is simple to use and avoids red tape and paperwork, which, as a businessman, he knows turns off prospective punters, but which, unfortunately, Thailand's bureaucracy appears addicted to. He also says the government has been too dependent on both the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Sinovac jab from China. He criticized authorities for declining to take part in the worldwide COVAX program. He warned of the competition that the kingdom faces on the world market for foreign tourists as many countries try to kickstart their foreign tourism industries at the same time, and called for greater momentum and enthusiasm in the country's vaccination drive. UK has vaccinated 30 million people already. It comes as the United Kingdom has nearly 30 million people already at least partly vaccinated and managed, over the weekend, to inoculate nearly 900,000 people in one day. Mr. Hynek has suggested the government use its emergency decree powers for this purpose, and as in the United Kingdom, to open the program up to the private sector in partnership and give them free rein to get on with the job. The government failed to inspire the public to take the vaccine and left them with negative feelings towards the vaccine. We will lose tourism trade to Vietnam, Hong Kong and Singapore because they have more efficient vaccination programs, he said. Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha's vaccination last week was an act of leadership that for 24 hours sparked a positive change. With his comments last week, the inoculation of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet with the AstraZeneca vaccine amid controversy swirling around the jab in Europe, was an impressive act of leadership by the government leader. In the hours afterwards, the PM promised to reverse controls on vaccines, limiting and indeed blocking their access to the private sector, and move towards reopening the kingdom again to foreign tourism. He promised further news by the end of the week. What we got last Friday, however, was more buzzwords and very little by way of a fundamental commitment apart from a reduction in quarantine periods from April until the 1st of October next, already announced previously. Since then, The positive attitude and spirit generated by the Prime Minister have become mired in confusion and inertia with no clear idea as to what exactly is happening on the 1st of October next. Threat remains from the virus. The situation, of course, has been complicated by outbreaks of the virus in Samut Prakan and again in the Bangkok area of Bangkok in recent days, including over 300 cases in Immigration Bureau detention facilities where nearly all prisoners were found to be infected. Officials at the Ministry of Public Health understandably must continue to focus on public health as a key priority. Minister supports Koh Samui and Phuket plans. On Monday, the Minister of Public Health Anutin Charnvirakul indicated that a plan to vaccinate the local population in both Phuket and Koh Samui was likely to be supported by the government, as he confirmed that officials would have access to 5 million AstraZeneca vaccines in June and 10 million per month thereafter. In the short term, he talked about access to 1 million vaccine doses reserved still for Samut Sakhran, but indicated that 100,000 would be allocated to Phuket and 50,000 doses to Koh Samui. However, when questioned on plans by Koh Samui to reopen by the 1st of July, the minister refused to confirm that the proposal would get the final go-ahead from the Centre for COVID-19 Situation Administration, CCSA, or that foreign tourists would be allowed to return to Thailand under more relaxed measures from that date. Koh Samui officials outlined their plans for a Samui Wonder Island, which amounts to relaxed quarantine. Details of the Koh Samui Wonder Island were released this week by Thirapong Chuaichu, who outlined a 2-week holiday on the island and its associated islands of Koh Phangan and Koh Tao, which would be tightly controlled and monitored with a tracking app. The Koh Samui director of the Department of Disease Control explained that tourists would be ferried from the airport in a controlled environment with partitioned vehicles to their hotels and would be restricted in their movement to their hotel room in the opening days of their stay. They would be required to use a local smartphone or tracking app on arrival and would be traced at all times during their stay. They would be subject to a COVID-19 test by day 2 or 3, and if confirmed negative, they would be given still restricted access to some areas on the island and within their hotel precincts. If they test negative, tourists will be allowed to travel in areas designated by the Samui District Disease Control Centre, said Mr. Thirapong. After 7 days and 2 tests, visitors can travel between 3 islands, Koh Samui, Koh Phangan and Koh Tao, for the second week of their holiday in Thailand. After a second COVID-19 test on the 7th day, the tourists would then be allowed to leave their hotel and move about at will across 3 islands. After 14 days, the visitors would be allowed to travel within the kingdom freely. Ratchakornpoon Sword of the Koh Samui Tourism Association on the Paradise Island was upbeat about this plan. Once an official approval is made by the Public Health Ministry, the Tourism Authority of Koh Samui would collaborate with Bangkok Airways and the Global Thai Tourism Authority to promote this campaign. It is expected to welcome the first group of Singaporean travellers by the earliest of the 1st of July, he said. Proposal has not been green-lighted yet by the Centre for COVID-19 Situation Administration, with talk of restrictions for high-risk countries. However, even with this scheme, there are already reports that those eligible to book such holidays in Thailand must be from countries that are not high-risk. This condition has not been clarified, nor has the scheme itself been given final approval by the Centre for COVID-19 Situation Administration (CCSA), despite being approved, like many others before it, in principle, which have later fallen in the face of changing circumstances. Criticism from tourism industry business leaders this week. Thirath Chirathavat, the chief executive of Centura Hotels and Resorts, also called on the government to focus now on a faster vaccination rollout and generating enthusiasm and momentum among the population. He also called for a clearer and more effective plan to bring back foreign tourists to the kingdom. He was joined by the president of the Thai Hotels Association, Marissa Sukasalnunpakdi, who wanted to see a reopening to foreign tourists confirmed by the 1st of July, warning that the foreign tourist industry could not wait until the 1st of October, as 50% of hotel jobs had already been lost.